Welcome to the Kino Cave, and today I'm talking about something very close to my heart. I'm going over the history of the Omnitrix from Ben 10. So, I absolutely love Ben 10. It was probably my favorite TV show as a kid. I grew up with it, I was obsessed with it. I had action figures of all the aliens. I had like a toy of all the Omnitrixes, and I watched the show religiously. If it was on, I had to watch it. It was insane obsession with Ben 10. It was everything to me for a good few years, to the point where even family members of mine just refer to me as like the Ben 10 kid. And they still do to an extent. So Ben 10 is something that is very near and dear to me. I kind of ignored it then throughout my teenage years when I was like discovering other media and stuff like that. But every once in a while I go back to Ben 10 and just watch the shows, and I have a piece of artwork that I did of classic Ben 10, which is currently hanging up on my wall. I'll put the picture in here right now. There's not that many YouTube channels that talk about Ben 10. There's obviously the Ink Tank. I think they're probably the most famous ones, and they do some great videos on Ben 10. And there's a few other smaller channels. And I thought I'd take a crack at talking Ben 10 because not many of them do. There's not much of a presence on the internet for Ben 10 stuff, at least not as much as I would hope. So today, I wanted to talk about the Omnitrix. I want to talk some Ben 10. And who knows, there will probably be many more Ben 10 videos to come after this one. So the Omnitrix has got to be one of the coolest devices in like media history, or like superhero media history at least, because it's just awesome. For any of you who don't know, because I imagine that Ben 10 probably isn't that popular, the Omnitrix is a watch that allows you to transform into, originally it was one of 10 aliens, and then more aliens got added afterwards, and when the show kind of got revamped into Alien Force and Ultimate Alien Omniverse, they started to like branch out and get tons more aliens. I think at the moment, if you don't count the reboot, there's like 68 aliens like known, but it's stated throughout the show that there's thousands or even millions of aliens. So today I'm going to go over the history of the Omnitrix in real life, and I'll go over a little bit of its backstory in the context of the show as well, and just give you my thoughts on the Omnitrix throughout the video. The first concept of the Omnitrix was designed by Stephen E. Gordon. He was just a working artist. He's mostly a comic book artist, I think, but he also does various TV shows. I'm not sure how much his involvement in Ben 10 was. It was originally, and the original name for the Omnitrix was the Megawatt, which was short for something that I'm not going to be able to remember, so I'm going to read it off of the page. Mega deoxyribonucleic transdimensional transformational numerator. Okay, so this is obviously just a bunch of words that they stranded together to make it sound cool and sci-fi like for 10-year-olds. And I do kind of, there's aspects of it I don't like transdimensional transformational numerator, like that's kind of, you're adding too many things just to make the name long, to make it like sound cool to a 10-year-old. I do like that they have deoxyribonucleic in there, because for those of you who don't know, DNA, the letters DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic something. I did biology in secondary school and I've forgotten a lot of it. So I'm sorry, my biology teacher, I won't reveal your real name. I remembered the deoxyribonucleic bit. So yeah, the megawatt isn't a terrible name, to be fair, for the Omnitrix. The long name is funny, but I don't mind that they didn't bother giving it a ridiculously long name. So Gordon's original design was originally resembling more like a wristwatch. Like, this is the Omnitrix in the show, in the classic show, before like the design, because the design changes in each version of the show, but this is the original. And yeah, it does not look like a wristwatch. It looks like a band. Which, for a 10-year-old, to be honest, I would imagine that a 10-year-old would have a watch that looks like a toy, and that watch would look like a toy. but it did resemble a wristwatch more closely, and I actually don't mind the design. This is Stephen E. Gordon's original design, and I like how the hand, like, is the kind of decider, and where the numbers on a wristwatch would be, those are kind of where all the alien icons would be. I think that's really interesting. It's definitely not as iconic, and it wouldn't have become as iconic as the hourglass or the diamond shape of the Omnitrix. But I think that is a really interesting, like, practical design, and you can definitely see the seeds for what would become the Omnitrix after. So this is really interesting. Ben 10 is definitely a sci-fi oriented show, sometimes to a detriment of itself, which I'll get into in future videos, I'm sure. But Ben 10 is squarely a sci-fi show, and it's about Ben turning into different aliens, experiencing what it's like to be other species, and of course there's a lot of interactions then that he has with other aliens as well throughout the show. But originally, Ben 10 was not going to transform into aliens. He was going to activate the Omnitrix and switch places with an otherworldly version of himself. So it was originally going to be like a multiverse oriented show where Ben would switch places with his dimensional self. And Ben would not necessarily be an alien, but he would be a superhero. So he would be like a humanoid person with powers. And he would still like resemble Ben Tennyson, I guess. And while I do find that really interesting, I think for the look of the show and the overall sci-fi vibe, and for the fact that it's a show, designed for 10-year-olds, it's much simpler and easier and helps the visuals a lot more that you just make it 10 aliens. Because I feel like if you make them all superheroes, they'll all start blending in and start looking the same. Unless you, like, just make them monsters, which is what they end up being in the show anyway, and then it's just easier to call them aliens at that point. So, definitely the right choice to go with aliens. But I find it really interesting that that was the original concept, that he would switch places with an alternate dimension version of himself that had superpowers. So, I thought I'd just go over, because, okay, pulling back the curtain a little bit here, there is very little information about the Omnitrix, like the real world backstory of the Omnitrix. I couldn't find commentary tracks for any of the episodes. Like, all of the sources, I may as well put them up now. Ben 10 Planet, I think it's called, or the Ben 10 Wiki, anyway, the fandom wiki page. That's where I got most of this information from. I couldn't really find much information outside of that. And most of the sources that this wiki cites are just people answering Twitter questions. Like, writers from the show and artists who worked on the show answering questions on Twitter. That's where most of this information is coming from. It's really unfortunate, but I'm saying right now, I'm going to put it out there, and no doubt anytime I talk about Ben 10, I'll put it out there as well. Remaster the show, put commentary tracks on each episode from Man of Action, or at least like the important episodes. Give it the Batman the Animated Series treatment. Remaster it on Blu-ray, add a bunch of commentary tracks and behind the scenes stuff. Because this show does not get enough love. It deserves so much more. So I thought I'd just go through the types of superheroes that Ben would change into originally, like their names and stuff, and the alien that eventually that superhero would become in the final show. So first you had Digger, which was a wild mutt. Digger is kind of like a short, kind of stocky, animalistic alien, and I guess his kind of main thing would be digging, since hence the name. You have Dragonfly, which ended up being Stinkfly. Again, it's just a guy in a super suit with, like, wings. So, interesting. Ghost Freak was basically the same name transferred over, just a spooky boy. Grey Matter. I don't think Grey Matter changed size in the original. But yeah, it's basically the same thing. He's the smart one. Inferno, which would become Heat Blast. Again, just a guy in a super suit. Just the Human Torch, basically, from Fantastic Four. Plant Guy, who would end up being Wildvine. Again, just humanoid superhero who kind of looks planty, like Poison Ivy, I guess, from Batman. You're starting to see where, like, the confusion's going to start coming in. When you have one guy who can be every superhero, you kind of need more distinct designs for each one that he turns into. Razor Jaws, who would become Rip Jaws. I like Razor Jaws. That's a cool name. I think Razor Jaws is a cool name for a character, but Rip Jaws is probably the best one to go with. You know, it sounds fishy. I like it. Strong guy who will become forearms. Strong guy. Took the whole weekend to come up with that one, I bet. I'm kidding, but like, you know, obviously they hadn't ironed out the details of this yet. I'm sure if they stuck with the superhero angle, they would have come up with a better name for strong guy. And forearms, it's simple, but it's effective. Upgrade, who would basically do the same thing as Upgrade from the show, and Accelerate, who was, again, basically the same. These were all just humanoid superheroes with super suits, and then they would have some small design element that would inform their superpowers. Definitely a good choice to go with aliens in the end, I think. So we're going. That was the original concept of the Omnitrix back when they were pitching the show, and you know no one was picking them up. But when they started getting more serious about this show, a man named Dave Johnson designed what would become the Omnitrix as we know it today, from the classic series, not any of the later ones, obviously. Dave Johnson is an interesting guy. He's an artist who worked on Ben 10 Classic, and he didn't work on much after, I think, like the second season of Ben 10 Classic. He didn't work on Alien Force or Ultimate Alien. I think he came back for some stuff in Omniverse. But yeah, very talented artist, really cool guy, from what I know of him anyway. Again, most of this information comes from Twitter, but, well, it comes from the Ben 10 wiki, which comes from Twitter. So that's pretty much it. It's kind of underwhelming, I guess, that there's not more information on the Omnitrix, but I guess I could go into, you know, the backstories of each alien, but going over each individual alien at least deserves their own little short video. This is purely just information about the watch itself and where it came from. I love that concept so much for a device. Like, for me, the Omnitrix is on the level of, like, the lightsaber of just pure ingenious designs for a sci-fi device. So now I'm going to get into some of, like, the in-universe explanations about the Omnitrix. Going into a few kind of behind-the-scenes trivia and stuff about the Omnitrix in-universe, and going over just some interesting tidbits that even the average Ben 10 fan probably doesn't know. At least I hope so. So the first little bit of trivia I found is that the transformation sequences in Ben 10, which are fucking badass. I absolutely love the transformation sequences in Ben 10 Classic and Alien Force specifically. I think they get a little bit lazy in the later seasons of the show, but definitely in Ben 10 Classic and Alien Force, they're just so cool. Those sequences are actually in slow motion. The transformation is instantaneous, which is how they kind of get around not doing the full sequence every single time. Often Ben will press the watch and you'll see a flash of green light and you'll just instantly be the alien. So whenever you see the transformation sequence in the show, it's actually happening in slow motion, which I found really interesting. I didn't know that previously. This next fact is one of my favorite aspects about Ben 10, and something that's surprisingly deep for a show for kids. And it's that Azimuth, the alien who originally created the Omnitrix, he designed the Omnitrix as a device for peace. He wanted to create ultimate understanding in the universe by allowing every species to walk in the shoes of every other species, so that they could feel what it's like to be in the other person's shoes. And that would then create more unity in the universe. And I find that really interesting because obviously everybody else treats it basically as a weapon, and Azimuth says as much in Secret of the Omnitrix, the animated film from the classic era. And I think I might be paraphrasing this line here, but he says, "I didn't make a weapon, you turned it into one." And I think that's really cool that, like, the Omnitrix wasn't designed to be a weapon. It's that everyone around it treated it as a one. Like, Ben instantly treats it as, like, a weapon that you can use to, admittedly, you know, defend people and save people, but he never thought about the social implications, which you wouldn't expect him to. He's a 10-year-old boy. But even, like, Grandpa Max doesn't really see it that way. It's only Azimuth that actually sees it that way. Really quickly, I'm going to go over this last few points because the battery's going to die. Are the Galvans, the aliens, the Galvans, which are like grey matter and Azimuth. They were the first aliens to ever be put into the Omnitrix, which makes a lot of sense. The hourglass symbol on the face of it is the intergalactic symbol for peace, which I find really cool. And when the Omnitrix jumps at Ben in the very first episode of the show, that's actually because it recognizes Ben's DNA as being part of Grandpa Max's DNA. Because the Omnitrix was originally intended to be given to Max, but when it recognized Max's DNA within Ben, it jumped at him, which I find really cool as well. And also that scene just resembles Alien, which I find awesome as well. And just as another citation, the Ben 10 wiki is where I got basically all of this information. There wasn't much information anywhere else, unfortunately. I would love to see the creators do a commentary track for the some episodes where we can learn a bit more about the creation of the show and the Omnitrix and everything in between. So, the battery's about to die, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a bit more about Ben 10 and the Omnitrix. I'm surely going to be doing more Ben 10 content very soon. See a review for X-Men 2 soon as well. I want to keep going through the X-Men movies because those mean a lot to me as well. I hope you're having a great day.